We're working with GE and private companies, and we will accelerate science and accelerate this research by doing so.
Outside the Lines has found that the league has used its clout to try to influence a major study of the neurodegenerative disease known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. The league also has awarded millions of dollars in research grants to scientists who serve on its powerful head, neck, and spine committee, yet raise questions about independent researchers who've been critical of the league.
Those who have covered the sport for more than a few years have seen this one coming like the proverbial train rolling full speed down the tracks. The National Football League has not only been exposed for not doing nearly enough to contain the possibility of life-threatening head injuries from their players for many decades, but has jammed themselves into a very public battle with the New York Times over credibility and accountability, a battle that is being won handily by the ink-stained wretches of the Gray Lady. Let's begin there and welcome back the man who invented the concept of commenting on and being an expert on the crossroads between sports, business, and money, the sports professor, Rick Horrow. All right, my friend. Welcome in, Professor. This has just been fascinating watching this go to the pages here for the last couple of days. When the NFL demands for a retraction, the New York Times comes right back and says, you're basically talking about opinion. And the best line they have is at the end. While your earlier letter to the Times called the tobacco industry perhaps the most odious industry in American history, you, the lawyers who put this request for retraction out, somehow failed to mention in either letter that it was your firm that represented Philip Morris in the RICO case. Rick, this is bad mojo for the NFL. Shouldn't they just lay back and say, hey, guys, we messed up. We'll take whatever punishment you want to throw us?
Well, let's first divorce PR. By the way, congratulations on ink-stained wretches of the Gray Lady. You're becoming Murrow-esque all the time, man. That is really good. And the beginning of your interview that poses some very significant questions here, not to be underestimated. And the bottom line is, it is a field day, by the way, for everybody who wants to pile on the NFL. And I'm not saying they don't deserve some of it. All I'm suggesting is that Roger Goodell, when you listen, is correct in the sense that they will expedite science. Whether they want to, they think it's the right thing to do, they're forced to now by their lawyers, or the fact is that people are saying, look, we better do it because it's in our business interest. They're spending a significant amount of money on this research. It should be independent. It needs to be independent. And frankly, every time concussion is run, whether it's perception or reality, then there's another issue. But it's bigger than that. I'm on the board of Pop Warner, and they do things right, and they're in the front of a runaway train because a lot of parents are scared right now. And the bottom line is, for the parents of the kids, they deserve the answers. That's really what's at stake.
Here's the thing, though, that I think they can do, though, and not that they will do it because we're talking about money and the biggest sport in America right now, but basically coming out and looking at this report and saying, guys, yeah, we did screw up. As a matter of fact, we did hide a lot of information. We did have a lot of omissions that we didn't challenge, and we're responsible, potentially, for the deaths of our players. When you talk about Pop Warner football and parents, I get it. Don't the parents and the fans want to hear this and say, come on, guys, let's clean this game up before it becomes an albatross?
Well, the big distinction, I guess, is that as cigarette smoke and people understood the tobacco industry, understood that more science was piling on, then it was very clear the sides that were to be taken. The issue of protective helmets, no tackling, no heading in soccer, how do you deal with some of these preventions, really has to be done in the context of expanding science. And whether the NFL says, we're completely to blame, we hid all this stuff before, we didn't hide it now, I think the bigger issue, candidly, is making sure, as Roger did say, science continues to be expedited, because that's the most important issue.
Yeah, that's, I think, what people want to hear, because for a long time the science was right there in front of them, and they actually did nothing about it. That, I think, is coming back to haunt him. All right, a couple of minutes here left. Let's go ahead and talk about this. And I thought this was going to happen a long time ago. 5 members of the U.S. women's soccer team, they filed a complaint against the U.S. Soccer Federation and the EEOC. They say it's wage discrimination. We are paid, the ladies say, nearly 4 times less than men's players, despite generating much more revenue. Rick, I think they got a dead-on point here, but a lot of people will come out and say, wait a minute, do you mean to tell me that the women's game actually makes money? A lot of people don't understand that, don't even know that yet.
Well, it depends on who's making the money before it gets to the bottom line. And so, by the way, the women, one time every 4 years, have an extraordinary amount of leverage. But for the rest of the time, they don't. The reason why men's and women's tennis tournament purses on the majors are pretty equal is because every time you see a Nadal or Djokovic, you see a Serena Williams, Maria Sharapova, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is leverage that goes along with the obvious claim of equal pay and equal money. I think the leverage doesn't exist in soccer, so hence the EEOC has to begin a very long journey here. And let's be very clear, if there's money to be made, the women's sports just doesn't have as much as the men's. Nobody can argue that. The question is, how do you balance that as far as wage equality or not? Ironically, different story, we're entering into UConn, establishing an all-time iconic role or iconic perception in history for women's basketball at the college level. And I think everybody wants to watch that as well. As much as the men? Probably not. But let's divorce how much money they make versus how much the players ought to be paid.
Well, not only that, but 30 seconds left, unfortunately, here. But let's put it this way. When you are a world champion, which the women's team is, to be paid 4 times less than a struggling men's team, that speaks volumes.
Well, it speaks volumes for a very quick settlement and very quick attention grabber, clearly. And I think the powers that be ought to get together and resolve this one fairly quickly.
And let's put it this way. The powers that be ought to start doing something with the men's team because, quite frankly, all we keep hearing every 4 years is they're getting better, they're getting better, they're getting better. And we always get disappointed.
Well, yeah, but we heard about that years ago. Remember when we talked about pro soccer catching on? MLS is a big deal. But listen, you're now pushing 70. I'm now pushing that near. And one of these days before we depart this earth, we ought to get good soccer teams, don't you think?
I'm always going to be younger than you, dude. You can't do anything about it. I know that grinds at you on a regular basis. And, by the way, your hair went gray long before mine.
Wow.
Rick Horrow, sports professor, thanks so much for allowing us this moment of warmth and togetherness, which we have every week. Take care, buddy. We'll talk to you soon. Stay with us. The Hardline continues.